It has been 50 years since the United States declared a proverbial war on poverty, and the official poverty rate in the United States has not decreased significantly since 1970. Although worldwide extreme poverty was halved between 1990 and 2010, 1.2 billion individuals still live in extreme poverty today. Poverty is a pervasive and deleterious issue that challenges the world. So why should we care about it? Why should we address poverty-related hardship? We believe that Rawls's principles of justice provide a philosophic framework that not only provides a compelling explanation for why we address poverty, but also a direct obligation for each of us to take action. In his book, A Theory of Justice, John Rawls put forth the idea of justice as fairness. Fair rules and a fair society are formed when all the stakeholders of that society come together to contract said rules. Rawls goes on to illustrate a thought experiment where all relevant stakeholders are behind a veil of ignorance. Behind the veil, no individual knows who they will be in society. They do not know their race, sex, socioeconomic status, or their conception of the good. Each individual does know that they are an agent that will pursue self-interested goals, can conceive of some type of good as a guiding principle, and will live in a society with others. From this contracting behind the veil, Rawls believes that we would establish two primary principles of justice. The first is that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty, compatible with a similar liberty for others. These liberties include free speech, the right to vote and hold property, the protection from unwarranted arrest, and a variety of other basic liberties. These liberties are primary and cannot be violated in order to enact some other good or principle. The second principle that Rawls purports is that social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage and attached to positions and offices open to all. Not everyone will make the same salary or have the same benefits in a just and fair society, but these inequalities have to be open to all individuals. The inequalities cannot come from irrelevant characteristics, such as salary inequalities dependent on skin color. Rather, salary inequalities might be permissible if they are based on work ethic or skill development. Furthermore, the inequalities have to be expected to be to everyone's advantage. Salary differences have to be expected to help drive the economy forward, promote growth, and not be to the detriment of the least well-off. In fact, they must help the least well-off. If we seek a just and fair society, then the two principles of justice are the guiding principles that we should use to shape our actions. Poverty, at least in its current form, is a violation of both of the principles. Those who are impoverished in our world do not have a true right to freedom of speech, access to voting, or the right to hold property. Some are victims of brutal regimes that forego these rights, while others who have these rights protected de jure do not have the ability to exercise them de facto. Crippling poverty forces individuals to spend their time on direct means of survival instead of participating in the freedom of expression and political participation. Knowledge asymmetries that arise from a lack of education rob many of property rights and protection from imprisonment. The poverty of the world in which we live is a gross violation of justice. To engender a just and fair society, we must address poverty and poverty-related hardship. Not only is there an amorphous need to address poverty in order to instill justice, but each of us is personally obliged to do so. As Thomas Pogge stated in his work, Severe Poverty is a Human Rights Violation. It is likely that most affluent individuals have caused untold consequences of life or death with their ordinary market transactions. Although Pogge asserts that responsibility lies at the institutional rather than individual level, we are each wrapped up in a society that benefits from the labor of the working poor, accrues wealth that is not shared with those in poverty, and turns a blind eye to the avenues of helping those in poverty-related hardships. To say that we do not affect or perpetuate the poverty of millions of individuals is to fool ourselves and those around us with willful indifference. In pursuing our own ends in isolation, not only are we ignoring the principles of justice, but we are discounting the effects that our actions and inactions have on the lives of others. This willful indifference is not a negligible omission, but a grievous violation of justice and ethical fairness.
Philosopher Garrett Hardin expressed strong concerns that helping the least well-off would ultimately endanger human existence. He illustrated this through the metaphor of a lifeboat. Imagine that all people born into a privileged society are aboard a lifeboat at sea, while surrounding them are the impoverished people of the world who are drowning. Hardin argues that those suffering from poverty-related causes should not be helped because there is limited capacity on the lifeboat. In other words, saving their lives would overcrowd the boat, and all on board would perish. Through this analogy, Hardin highlights a severe ecological problem. He claims that our planet does not have the capacity to provide sustenance to the entire world population, especially at exponential growth rates. Thus, we face the tragedy of the commons, which states that because agents will be guided by self-interest, common resources will be depleted if left available. Therefore, in order to preserve the Earth, access to its resources should not be distributed equitably, if at all. According to Hardin, ignoring the suffering of the poor through measures such as cutting immigration and foreign aid is the best way to preserve the Earth and its inhabitants. It is a harsh ethic, but one that will promote the longevity of the human race. Hardin's consequentialist ethics, however, are problematic for a number of reasons. First, he understates the efficacy of aid and ecological capacities. In reality, overpopulation is not the real challenge we face globally. It's resource management. Over the past century, huge technological strides have been made, which have allowed for more efficient ways to allocate resources. And while there is still significant work to be done before an equitable and sustainable distribution can be achieved, the lifeboat may actually be more spacious and augmentable than Hardin leads us to believe. Another issue with the lifeboat ethics approach is that it privileges the liberties of the already affluent over impoverished human life. This is completely incompatible with Rawls' notions of justice as fairness, which states that behind the veil of ignorance, it would be agreed to that basic liberties and the equality of opportunity to achieve a minimal level of well-being would be guaranteed for all stakeholders in the society, not just for the fortunate or elite. A second objection comes from libertarian thinker Robert Nozick, who presents problems with redistribution through his theory of entitlement, which states that a person is entitled to a holding if and only if that holding was originally acquired justly and subsequently transferred to that person justly. In addition to these principles, Nozick recognizes two other conditions that must be fulfilled before a distribution can qualify as being just. First, rectification that states that in order to assess whether someone is justly entitled to a holding, the historical context of its acquisition and transfer must be considered. So, if injustices like stealing or forced labor are discovered to have contributed to the process of the distribution, then the appropriate rectification must be made. The second condition is a Lockean proviso, which states that an original acquisition is unjust if it worsens the conditions or situations of others. In other words, there must be as much or as good of the acquired resource left available for others to not be deprived of it. Following all these conditions, then, bestows upon an individual the entitlement to a holding. Nozick also condemned taxation as a violation of basic rights because it unjustly redistributes the wealth that people are entitled to. Nozick's critique of redistribution, however, falls short on multiple accounts if we are to hold to Rawls's theory of justice as fairness. First, Nozick's conception of justice in distributions allows for an individual to be entitled to something even if he or she did not deserve it. This immediately contradicts the difference principle agreed upon behind the veil of ignorance, which states that in order to rectify undeserved injustices, the least well-off must be given the greatest advantages in life. And since no one really has a say in their given position in life, redistribution of even justly acquired wealth is justified. Another potential flaw in Nozick's argument is his insistence on property rights as being the foremost of basic liberties. This is problematic because the defense of property rights does not necessarily correlate with the protection of all the other basic liberties that one would be entitled to in a society whose principles were determined behind the veil.
Though Hardin and Nozick provide astute critiques of a rights and distribution-based theory of justice, they fail to undermine the premise that Rawls set forth in a theory of justice. The two principles of justice require a society that respects the rights and liberties of all individuals, while simultaneously assuring that inequalities are open to all and to the benefit of the least well-off. Our holdings as individuals, through the randomness of birth, into affluent society, oblige us to make every effort to secure the rights and liberties of the impoverished and to work for their social and economic aid.